She couldn't scream, not because fear had stolen her voice, because silence had been her world since she was 4 years old, and the fever came and took sound away forever. She couldn't scream. And he knew that. He had always known that. What Ju Kang did not know, what no one in that mansion on the edge of Las Vegas's most exclusive ridge had ever considered, was that Nicky had been watching them the entire time. Every corridor, every locked door, every envelope slid under every table. She had been watching with the precise, unblinking attention of a woman who could not afford to stop watching. And the night he crossed the line, Ju Kang did not break her. He woke something up. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's go. The Kang estate sat on a private ridge 15 minutes above the Las Vegas Strip, hidden behind iron gates and surveillance cameras that rotated like slow, patient eyes. From the highway below, you could see the outline of it at night. White stone architecture, floor-to-ceiling windows, a rooftop terrace that caught the desert stars. Tourists sometimes asked their drivers what that building was. Their drivers usually said, "Old money, new power," and left it at that. Nicky had been working inside those walls for 9 months. She was 23 years old, 5'4". With natural hair she kept pinned back during work hours and hands that never stopped moving. She had been deaf since the age of 4, when a fever tore through her small body and left silence in its place forever. But silence had never defined her the way people assumed it would. If anything, it had built something in her that most people spent their whole lives trying to find: stillness, precision. The ability to read a room like a paragraph and understand it fully before a single word was spoken. She watched everything. The angle of someone's jaw when they were lying, the way fingers tightened around a glass before a confrontation, the specific tension in a person's shoulders that meant they were about to make a decision they would not take back. She had learned to read the world the way other people read books, for subtext, for the thing beneath the thing, or for the truth that words were designed to hide. Tonight, she was reading the Kang mansion. Las Vegas in a thunderstorm was something the tourism boards never advertised. The desert sky cracked open differently here. Violent, electric, like the city itself was finally losing its composure after years of pretending everything was fine. Lightning threw white light across the marble floors of the grand hallway as Nicky worked her mop in slow, careful strokes. She could feel the thunder through the soles of her rubber slippers, through the floor, through the bones of her feet. The vibration moved up through her like news delivered too quietly to hear. She did not know yet that her phone, tucked into the pocket of her gray uniform, was about to buzz with the worst 5 words she had ever read. She did not know that the worst had not yet happened tonight. She pushed the mop cart toward the east wing. Kang Seojun, a Jupe's father and patriarch of an empire that stretched from Seoul to Singapore to the underground infrastructure of 3 American cities, had built this house the way he built everything, with total control and zero compromise. The legitimate side of the Kang family was luxury real estate development, private equity, and a charitable foundation whose name sat on 2 hospital wings in the city. The side that nobody wrote about, the side that the 3 journalists who had tried to write about it had quietly and permanently stopped writing about, was something older and darker and deeply woven into the fabric of how Las Vegas actually ran. Kang Seojun was in Seoul for 10 days. Business. The specific kind described only as business and never described further. He had left behind a house, a staff, and a son. Ju Kang was 27 years old, and from her first week in this house, Nicky had understood exactly what kind of man he was, not because he was loud, not because he made open threats. He was dangerous the way structural damage is dangerous, invisible from the outside, catastrophic under pressure, handsome in the architecture of someone who had been told he was handsome every day since birth. Tall and broad-shouldered with the physical ease of a man who had never once been denied anything that required physical effort to take. His mother had passed when he was 14. He had grown up in this house with resources that had no ceiling, freedom that had no consequences, and a father whose version of parenting was containment rather than correction. The house staff talked about Ju P. In the break room, in the tones people use when they are choosing words for safety rather than clarity. Nicky could not hear those conversations, but she could read them. She had watched Diane, the maid before her, go from warm and steady to hollow and trembling in the space of 4 weeks. She had watched Diane pack her things on a quiet Tuesday morning with shaking hands, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. She had watched Clara before Diane, and Simone before Clara. The pattern was visible to anyone paying attention. Nicky had told herself to stay invisible. She was deaf. He would lose interest. She was quiet. He would not notice her. She had been wrong on both counts. She pushed the mop into the east wing corridor and moved quickly, head down, her strokes efficient. The storm threw shadows through the tall windows. The corridor was long and dim and smelled of cedar and cold stone. She was almost through it when she felt the hand on her shoulder. She spun. Ju Pi stood 2 feet behind her. He had come out of his private suite without sound, or rather, without sound she could detect. Dark trousers, no shirt, a glass of whiskey in his left hand. His hair was slightly disheveled. His eyes were not. He looked at her with an expression she recognized from watching Dangerous Animals. Patient, already decided, the look of something that had never once been told no in a way that changed its behavior. She stepped back. He stepped forward. She pressed herself against the wall and held his gaze. Calm, measuring. Not because she was unafraid. She was afraid precisely and accurately, or her heartbeat spiking with what her body understood before her mind finished calculating. But she had learned young that fear looked like invitation to men like Ju Pi Kang, and she would not give him that. He reached out and touched her face. She pushed his hand away. Her eyes did not move. He smiled, set the whiskey glass down on the small side table beside him. Slowly, deliberately. The way a man sets down something he no longer needs because he has already decided to take something else. What happened in the next few minutes, this story will not describe in full. There are things too enormous for complete description. Some events are better understood in their aftermath. In the way a person slides down a wall in a dark corridor, in the way the floor feels cold even through cloth, in the way silence, which was always there, suddenly feels like a different kind of wound. Nicky sat on the floor of that corridor for a long time after Ju Pi went back into his room. The mop had fallen, the bucket had tipped, and soapy water crept across the marble slowly, like it was trying to reach her. The chandelier at the far end blinked once in the storm's electric pull. She did not cry. Not yet. She was in the part that comes before crying. The enormous, terrible part where the mind goes very still and very far away, like it has stepped back from a window and cannot yet process the distance to the ground. Then, her phone buzzed. Once. Twice. 3 times. The urgent pattern she had set for messages from her neighbor, old Mrs. Rosa, who checked on Nicky's mother every evening. She pulled the phone from her pocket with hands that were not quite steady. 5 words on the screen. Your mother. Come now. Hurry. Nicky's mother was named Grace. She had raised Nicky alone after Nicky's father left when she was 2, before the fever, before the deafness, before everything. Grace had worked as a seamstress for 20 years, bent over a machine in a small room full of color and thread, sewing other people's lives together to buy her daughter medication, school fees, and small joys. When Grace's heart condition appeared 3 years ago and the medication became expensive in the way that changes everything, it was Nicky who found this job, who swallowed what this job required, who sent money home every 2 weeks and told her mother, "Don't worry, Mama, I have it handled." She stood up. She ran, past the fallen mop, out of that corridor, through the kitchen, past the sleeping side door guard, down the hill, and into the rain that was falling hard and cold and completely indifferent. She had no umbrella, no bag, nothing but her phone and her wet clothes and those 5 words burning in her chest like something molten. The bus had stopped running. It was 12:47 in the morning. She pulled up a ride app with trembling fingers. $38. She had $9 in her account, 9 months of wages. We asked nearly all of it sent home in 2-week installments. Grace's heart medication alone cost $300 a month without insurance, and the rent on her mother's apartment had risen twice since Nicky took this job. There was never anything left. There was never supposed to need to be. She stood in the desert rain on the side of a Las Vegas highway and made a calculation that no human being should ever have to make. She flagged down a motorcycle cab and spent $7 of those $9 getting to the hospital. She arrived soaking, breathless, her hair flat against her face. Mrs. Rosa was in the hallway outside room 11. She was a round, soft woman who had been Grace's neighbor for 16 years. When she saw Nicky coming, she covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes filled immediately, the eyes of someone who has been holding news that cannot be held any longer. Nicky read her face and stopped walking. She knew. Before Mrs. Rosa reached for her hands, before the doctor emerged from room 11 with his quiet, careful expression, she knew before she pushed the door open and saw the flat, steady line on the monitor beside the bed. Grace's face was peaceful in a way Nicky had never seen on it in life. Her mother had always been moving, always had some small worry pulling at the edges of her expression. Now those edges were smooth. The tired, faithful, the overworked heart of a woman who had sacrificed everything had simply given out. The medication had run out 4 days ago. The pharmacy had been closed for a holiday. Grace had not wanted to worry Nicky. Had told Mrs. Rosa, she'll send more soon. It's fine. It's fine. Nicky stood beside the bed for a long time. She put her hand on her mother's hand. Then she folded herself over the white sheet, her forehead against the cold fabric, and she cried the way deaf people cry, without sound. Only motion, her whole body shaking like the thunder she could feel in the floor beneath her feet but could not hear. Some nights mark a person, not on the surface like a scar, deeper, the way a fault line marks the earth, hidden and structural, the kind that means one day, under the right pressure, everything will split. That night, something split in Nicky. The part of her that had been patient split, the part that had been invisible, careful, enduring, that had told itself it's temporary. It's worth it. It's fine. That part cracked straight through. She sat in the hospital with her mother's cold hand in hers and thought about Ju-P Kang and his mansion on the ridge above Las Vegas. She thought about his smile. She thought about the whiskey glass he had set down so carefully before he took what he wanted. She thought about Diane and Clara and Simone. She thought about every woman who had walked out of that house with hollow eyes and shaking hands, and never once, not once, deep in believed. And something in Nicky that had been sleeping her whole life opened its eyes. 3 days after her mother's funeral, Nicky went back to the Kang mansion. Everyone expected her to quit. Mrs. Rosa begged her across the kitchen table, holding her hands. 2 women from Grace's church looked at her with expressions full of worry when she told them her intention. Even Linda, the social worker who had processed Grace's death paperwork, a worn woman who had seen too much of what Las Vegas did to people who couldn't afford not to see it, had pressed a card into Nicky's hand and said quietly, "There are places you can go." Nicky had taken the card. She had put it in her pocket, and she had gone back to the mansion, not because she had no choice, because she had made one. She arrived at the gate at 6 in the morning, same as always. Her uniform was pressed, her face was composed. The security guard, a quiet older man named Robert, who had always given Nicky a small nod that acknowledged her as a complete human being, looked at her as she approached. Something moved across his face. He pressed the button. The gate opened. She walked up the long driveway toward the house that had taken everything from her. Mrs. Park, the senior housekeeper, a precise Korean woman in her 50s, who ran the household staff like a general and maintained a practiced talent for not seeing what she preferred not to see, was already in the kitchen with her coffee and her clipboard. When Nicky walked in, something flickered across Mrs. Park's face. Guilt, maybe, or the specific discomfort of someone who has been waiting to feel something and finally does. She set down her clipboard. Mouthed, "You're back," Nicky nodded. "I'm sorry about your mother." Nicky nodded again, went to the supply room and picked up her mop. But this mop was not just a mop anymore. In her second week working at the Kang mansion 9 months ago, Nicky had found something behind a loose tile in the back bathroom that only the staff used. She noticed it because she noticed everything. The tile sat at a fractionally wrong angle. The grout around it was newer than the tiles beside it, as if someone had replaced it carefully and recently. She worked it loose one evening after her shift and found a small folded note inside. The handwriting was thin and slightly rushed, like someone writing quickly before they lost their nerve. If you're new and reading this, get out before the 4th month. He always waits. He's patient that way. We reported it. Nothing happened. His father makes calls and it goes away. We were too scared to push further. Don't be us. Tell someone. Tell anyone. Please don't be us. No signature. Nicky had replaced the tile. She had thought about that note every single day since. Now she was thinking about it differently. At least 3 women before her had known enough to leave a warning. 3 women frightened into silence. She was going to go further than silence. She was going to go all the way to the truth. Her first problem was names. She had faces and first names and rough timelines. What she needed were last names, contact information, and records she could document. She found what she needed in Mrs. Park's office, a small room beside the kitchen that Nicky cleaned weekly and which contained, in a locked filing cabinet, the household's complete employment history. Mrs. Park always locked the cabinet. She always left the key on top of it, nudged behind a small succulent plant, in the specific way of a person who needs to believe they are being careful while ensuring they will never lose access. One morning, while Mrs. Park was upstairs consulting about a tile replacement in the west bathroom, on a job that would keep her occupied for at least 40 minutes, Nicky opened the cabinet and photographed every page of the employment records with her phone. 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Cabinet relocked. Key behind the succulent. Nicky back in the kitchen, mopping the floor with the same expression she always wore. She had names now: Diane Atkins, Clara Shin, Simone Osei, and 3 others going back 6 years, each with a start date, an end date, and a remark in Mrs. While Park's neat handwriting. Resigned without notice. 6 women, 6 records, 6 identical remarks. Nicky sat in the staff bathroom that night with her phone in her lap and stared at those 6 names for a long time. Then she opened a new message and typed carefully. My name is Nicky. I'm currently working at the Kang house in Las Vegas. I know what happened to you. I know because it happened to me too. I'm not afraid anymore. I want to do something about it. Will you talk to me? She sent it to Diane Atkins at 11:47 p.m. The reply came at 1:53 in the morning. Who is this? How did you get this number? I photographed the employment records from Mrs. Park's cabinet. I have all 6 names. I have dates. I'm building something, Diane. And I need you. A long pause. The icon pulsing. Diane reading, not reading, reading again, the agonizing rhythm of someone on the other side of a message deciding how much of themselves to risk. Then, it won't matter. It never matters with this family. Kang Seojun owns people in this city. He always has. Nicky wrote back, his father owns people. He does not own the internet. He does not own 6 women who decide on the same day to speak. 4 minutes of silence. Then, tell me your plan. She contacted Clara next. Clara took 3 messages before she replied, and when she finally did, she only asked, what are you actually trying to do with this? Simone Osei was the hardest. Simone had signed a non-disclosure agreement when she left the Kang household, a legal document with language that Simone, who had not gone past high school, barely understood, but which had come with a check for $12,000 that had paid off her family's debt at the exact moment it needed paying. Simone was afraid of lawyers. Simone was specifically afraid of Kang Seojun's name on any document sent in her direction. Nicky spent 4 nights working on her message to Simone. She wrote it out by hand first, on the back of a grocery receipt, crossing out and rewriting, thinking through every fear Simone might carry and addressing it one by one, honestly, without promises she could not keep. In the end, what moved Simone was not strategy. It was one line. My mother died the same night it happened to me, Simone. She died because I couldn't leave to get her medication in time. He stole that from me. He stole the last hour I could have had with her. I'm not asking you to be brave for me. I'm asking you to be brave for yourself and for the woman who is in that house right now whose name neither of us knows yet. Simone did not reply that night. She replied in the morning. I'm in. While Nicky was building her case, something else was happening inside the mansion, something she had not planned for. Jupi had begun watching her, not the way he had watched her before. That had been opportunistic, careless, the behavior of a man who takes what is in front of him without thought. This was different. This was targeted and specific. The dawn of a deliberate attention that was somehow more dangerous than what had already happened. She felt it the way she felt everything she could not hear, through her skin, through the fine hairs at the back of her neck, through the way the temperature of a room changed when he entered it. She would be cleaning the dining hall and turn to find him in the doorway with his coffee, watching her with an expression she couldn't read cleanly. Not predatory exactly. More like calculation, like a man adding up a sum that kept coming out wrong. He suspects something, she thought. He can see that I'm not broken, and it's confusing him. She kept her face unchanged, pressed, composed, focused visibly on whatever surface she was cleaning next. One afternoon, she was working in the main sitting room when Joo-P walked in and stopped behind her. She turned. He said something. She watched his lips. "You've been here a long time." She said nothing, nodded slightly. "You're different from the others," she thought. "You have no idea." She kept working. After a moment he left. She tracked his footsteps through the vibration in the floor, down the hall, up the stairs, gone. She let out a slow, controlled breath. He was watching. Which meant she was running out of time. She returned to her room after a full shift and found it slightly wrong. Not obviously wrong. The kind of wrong only she would catch, because she always noticed, because a life of silence had trained her to read physical space the way other people read tone. Her phone charger was on the left side of the nightstand instead of the right. The small notebook she kept for shopping lists was closed instead of open. The zipper on her bag was not quite where she had left it. Someone had searched her room. Nicky sat on the edge of the bed and felt something cold move through her chest. She had been keeping everything on her phone, the photographs of the employment records, the screenshots of her conversations with Diane, Clara, and Simone, her detailed notes organized by date and name. All of it in one place. No backup, no redundancy, no safety net. She had been so focused on gathering that she had neglected protecting. She had one night, maybe less. She did not sleep. From 10 p.m. until 3:30 in the morning, she sat in the dark with her phone and moved everything. She created 3 cloud accounts under names unconnected to her and uploaded every file to all 3 separately. She compressed the files and emailed them to Diane, Clara, and Simone with a single instruction: "Do not open unless you lose contact with me." She took the small memory card she had bought 2 weeks earlier and copied everything onto it. Then she sewed it into the hem of her uniform with tiny, careful stitches she had learned from watching her mother's hands for 20 years. The card sat flat against the fabric, invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. By the time she finished, the Nevada sky outside her narrow window was fading from black to deep purple. She looked at what she had built. 6 testimonies in various stages of completion, 3 detailed and signed, photographs of employment records, notes cross-referenced by date, the unmistakable fingerprints of a pattern. And then there was what Diane had sent her 3 nights ago. A video. Diane had recorded it in the weeks after leaving the Kang house, when she was still waking at 3 in the morning with her hands shaking, still swinging between fury and terror. She had sat in her apartment and recorded herself describing exactly what had happened. Dates, times, specific rooms within the mansion. She had been precise and clear in the way of someone who knows they will never forget a single detail and is determined not to let those details go unwitnessed. She had kept it locked on her phone for 2 years, unable to delete it, unable to use it, carrying it like evidence from a crime that no one would ever try. "I don't know why I'm sending this to you," Diane had written. "I think it's because you're the first person who ever asked." Nicky had watched the video without sound, transcription running along the bottom. She had read every word. Then she watched it again, this time not reading the transcription at all, only watching Diane's face, the steadiness of her eyes, the way her hands moved when she described what had happened, the absolute clarity of a woman telling the truth with no audience, no performance, no reason to exaggerate. But it was the most powerful thing Nicky had ever watched. She had one more piece to find. She needed the money trail. Without proof that Kang Seojun had personally directed the financial suppression, that the payments were not isolated goodwill but a deliberate and documented pattern, Joo-P was only an accused man from a wealthy family. And wealthy families had lawyers who turned accused men back into acquitted men with a speed and efficiency that had everything to do with resources and nothing to do with truth. She typed a message to Diane. "Do you know anyone very good with computers?" Diane replied. "My boyfriend. What do you need?" Diane's boyfriend was named David. He was 28 and worked in cybersecurity, which meant he understood both what was possible and what was catastrophically inadvisable. But he asked the right questions. He told Nicky what she needed to know. He could not break into Kang Seojun's private financial systems. That would be illegal and would destroy their case rather than build it. But in civil litigation involving NDAs signed under duress, financial records were often made accessible through legal discovery. There were lawyers who specialized in exactly this, breaking NDAs that had been used to silence and suppress. He gave her a name. Victoria Reeves, a lawyer in Las Vegas, 43 years old, who had successfully voided 5 coercive NDAs in the past 3 years, and who had once said in a newspaper interview, an interview that Kang Seojun had reportedly attempted to kill before publication, that powerful men used ND as the way architects use load-bearing walls, not to hold anything up but to make sure you cannot get through without bringing the entire structure down. Nicky wrote down the name, pulled out the card from her pocket, the one Linda the social worker had pressed into her hand at the hospital. She sent one message. "I need help. Not for me. For 6 women. Can you help me find a lawyer named Victoria Reeves?" Linda replied within the hour. "I know exactly who she is. I'll make the call." The call was arranged for the following evening. Nicky in the locked staff bathroom, phone propped on the edge of the sink. Victoria Reeves on a laptop screen, sharp-faced and absolutely still, with the focused energy of someone who was always already working. Diane was on the call to speak for Nicky when Nicky needed voice. The call lasted 85 minutes. Victoria Reeves asked precise, detailed questions and showed no visible reaction to the answers, the face of a woman who had heard terrible things enough times to have learned that the only productive response to them was action. At the end, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something, and Diane repeated it for Nicky. "What you have is strong. Not complete, but strong. Diane's video is your anchor. The employment pattern is your foundation. Simone's NDA can be challenged. I've broken tighter ones. But to make this truly airtight, to ensure this doesn't get buried the way these things have been buried before, I need one more thing." Diane asked what? Someone who was inside that house when the payments were arranged. A staff member. Someone who witnessed Kang Seojun's management of these situations directly. Someone who was there when the money changed hands. Nicky sat very still on the edge of that bathtub. She already knew the answer. Mrs. Park. The next morning, Nicky arrived in the kitchen at 6 as usual. Mrs. Park was at the counter with her coffee. Nicky poured herself water, drank it, then turned to face the housekeeper. She pointed to herself, pointed to Mrs. Park, held up 2 fingers, and gestured to the small corner table where staff sometimes took their breaks. "I need to talk to you." Mrs. Park looked at her. Something in the housekeeper's face went carefully still, the face of a woman who has known for a long time that a certain conversation was coming and has been waiting to see who would finally begin it. She put down her clipboard. She sat at the table. Nicky opened her phone to a note she had prepared. "You know what he did. Not just to me, to all of them. You signed the paperwork every time. You wrote resigned without notice 6 times in 6 years, and you never once asked why. I'm not angry at you for that. I understand survival, but I need you to understand that this time is different. This time, there is evidence. This time, there are lawyers. This time, he's not going to escape. The question is whether you escape with him or whether you choose something different." Mrs. Park read the note. Her face moved through several things in rapid succession. Defensiveness. Then fear. Then something older and deeper than both. Something that looked, under everything, almost like relief. The expression of a person who has been carrying something alone for far too long and has just been given a reason to put it down. She picked up Nicky's phone, typed, "If I help you, this family will end me." Nicky took the phone, typed, "If you don't help me, you will end yourself. You've been doing it for 15 years. You know that. That's why you look the way you look every single morning." Mrs. Park stared at the screen for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the small office beside the kitchen, unlocked the filing cabinet with the key from behind the succulent plant that she had always kept in the same place, and came back carrying a manila envelope. She set it on the table between them, typed one word on Nicky's phone. "Copies." Nicky opened the envelope. Inside were 6 checks, each made out to a different name, are each drawn on the Kang family's private legal account and signed by Frederick Han, the family attorney who had managed their sensitive matters for 18 years. But each check carried something else, a single notation in the corner in Kang Seojun's own handwriting. One word written in the unhurried script of a man who had never once imagined these pieces of paper leaving that room. Settlement. It was the specific arrogance of a man who had operated without consequences for so long that he had stopped imagining they were possible. He had not needed to annotate those checks himself. He had simply wanted to. A private record of control, kept for his own satisfaction, in his own hand. The kind of mistake only the untouchable make. Mrs. Park had been keeping these copies for 15 years. She had been waiting, the way quiet people sometimes wait, for someone to finally walk in and ask. Kang Seojun's private jet touched down at Harry Reid International Airport on a Friday morning at 8:15. The desert sky was clean and bright, indifferent as Las Vegas always was to the lives being quietly detonated beneath it. His car was waiting on the tarmac. His assistant reviewed the week's agenda during the drive to the ridge. He answered 3 emails on his tablet. He arrived at the mansion at 9:50. The gardens were perfect. The fountain in the circular drive was running. The house looked exactly the way it always looked. He did not yet know that 4 things had happened in the 18 hours before his wheels touched desert ground. The first, Victoria Reeves had filed a motion at 7 p.m. the previous evening to invalidate Simone Osei's non-disclosure agreement on the grounds of coercive signing conditions. She cited specific boilerplate contract language that Kang Seojun's own legal team had used in at least 4 previous settlements. The filing went on public court record where anyone with internet access could pull it before morning. Victoria had not requested comment, had not issued warning, had simply filed it clean and complete, the way a woman files something when she has done it enough times to know that warning the other side is the same as giving them a head start. The second. Diane Atkins had walked into a Las Vegas police station at 9:30 p.m. and submitted a formal report. Beside her was Clara Shin, who had driven in from Phoenix. Beside Clara was Simone Osei, who had not slept, who sat in a plastic chair in a precinct waiting room, thinking about every year she had spent trying to convince herself that what had happened was somehow her fault. The detective who received their statements was a woman named Carol Briggs, 44 years old, 12 years working abuse cases, the specific kind of tired that comes from seeing too much and refusing to stop seeing. When she watched Diane's video from beginning to end without pausing once, then she set down her pen and said, in a voice very quiet and very certain, "This is exactly what I needed." The following morning, before Seojun's jet had even landed, Briggs received a call from a deputy chief whose name appeared twice in the Kang family's charitable donation records. The call was politely worded, professionally indirect. The kind of call designed to give a detective a graceful reason to slow down. Might lose a file, find a procedural complication. Briggs listened without interrupting. When the deputy chief finished, she said, "The report is filed, the evidence is logged, and the witnesses are formally protected. Is there anything else?" There was a pause on the line. Then the call ended. Briggs went back to work. The third. A journalist named Paul Weir, who had spent 2 years trying to write the Kang story and had been blocked, threatened. He had sources vanish and editors suddenly become unavailable, had received a courier package that morning at his apartment. David had spent 2 evenings locating the address. Weir had been careful about his personal information, the way a man is careful after he's been threatened. But careful and invisible are different things, and David was very good at his job. Inside the package was a memory card. On the memory card was everything, testimonies, signed and dated, photographs of employment records, copies of 6 settlement checks, each bearing Frederick Hahn's signature, and Kang Seojun's own handwritten notation in the corner. A timeline document so precise, so organized, so methodically constructed that Weir had read it twice before calling his editor, and his editor had read it once before saying, "We run this tomorrow morning. Get a comment request to their PR team by 2 o'clock. The 4th. Nicky was already gone. She had left the mansion at 5:45 in the morning before the sun was fully up, while the house held the thick particular silence of very early dawn, the silence she had lived inside for 9 months, the silence she had learned to use the way other people use light. She had packed her bag in the dark. She did not own much. Everything fit with room to spare, which had always been one of the loneliest facts about her life, and which now, in the gray pre-dawn of this specific morning, it felt almost like freedom. She left her uniform on the bed, folded, pressed, every crease sharp, not because she owed the Kang household a pressed uniform, because she had always done her work well, and she was not going to stop now. On the kitchen table, she left a handwritten note, small, precise handwriting, placed where Mrs. Park would find it with her morning coffee. "Thank you. Whatever happens next, you chose the right side. My mother would have thanked you too." She walked down the long driveway in the pre-dawn dark. She passed Robert at the gate, Robert who had always given her that small nod, the only person in that compound who had looked at her like she was a full person. He was on the early shift. He looked at her bag. He looked at her face. He pressed the button without a word, and the gate swung open, and she walked through it. She did not look back. Kang Seojun found out about the legal filing at 11 in the morning. His lawyer, Frederick Han, called with a voice 3 degrees tighter than his usual measured tone. Seojun listened, asked 4 questions, set the phone down, and sat without moving for a full minute in his mahogany office, the room where he had solved every problem, where 40 years of controlled victories lived in the walls. He found out about the police report at noon, from a contact at the precinct whose favors had always been sufficient. The contact's voice was careful. The report had been filed by a detective named Briggs, who ran a tight department and was known for being impossible to redirect. She had already shut down 1 inquiry from above. 2 witnesses had already given formal statements. The contact said, with the discomfort of someone delivering news they would rather not, "I don't think this one moves." He found out about the journalist at 2 in the afternoon precisely. When his PR director called to say that Paul Weir's editor had formally requested an official comment on a story going live at 6 the following morning. The PR director read him the subject line. "Kang family abuse cover-up, 6 women, 6 years, 6 payoffs, documents attached." Kang Seojun sat with that subject line for a long moment. Then he said, "Get Ju P." Ju P came into the office the way he came into every room, loose, unhurried, with the physical ease of someone who had never once had to brace himself for anything. White shirt, dark trousers, hair still damp. He looked, his father thought, like a man who had had a completely ordinary morning. He sat across from Seojun and looked at him with mild curiosity. Seojun placed the printed legal motion on the desk between them. Beside it, the PR email. Beside that, a single sheet of paper with 6 names in his own careful handwriting. Ju P picked up the lawyer's motion and read it. His father watched his face move through its changes, the way a man watches weather travel across flat land. Confusion first, genuine confusion, the expression of someone who had never seriously imagined this moment. Then disbelief, the more dangerous kind, the kind that reaches for exits, and the familiar comfort of this cannot actually be happening. Then, briefly, something that looked almost like his father, the instinct to calculate, to find the angle, to locate the lever. And then Seojun said, "She has copies of the checks, with my handwriting on them." The calculation stopped. Ju P's face went completely still. "How?" Mrs. Park. The name landed in the room like a stone into still water, rings spreading out from a single point, going all the way to the edges. Ju P stared at his father. Seojun stared back. Between them, the silence of 2 men who had just run out of a shared fiction and were standing on the other side of it, looking at each other without it for the first time. "She's a maid," Ju P said. Something young and raw had crept into his voice where the ease had been. "She's deaf. How is this? Stop." Ju P stopped. "She is a woman," Seojun said, "whose mother died while she was working in this house. She worked inside these walls for 9 months and she was invisible the entire time. And while she was invisible, she built a case that now has a filed legal motion on public record, a formal police report with 3 witnesses, a journalist with a documented story running at 6 tomorrow morning, and 6 women whose testimonies agree down to specific rooms, specific dates, and specific dollar amounts in my own handwriting. He said all of this in his business voice, the flat, precise voice of a man doing a calculation. I have been making calls since 11 this morning. I have called every number I have. I have pulled every favor I have accumulated in 40 years of operating in this city. He looked at his son directly. I cannot find the lever. There is no lever. A 23-year-old woman with $9 in her bank account outplanned this family. She had no connections, no legal standing, and she built something I cannot dismantle. Do you understand what I'm telling you? The room was very quiet. Joo-P opened his mouth. His father raised one hand. And don't. Seojun said it once. Whatever you are about to say, don't. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at Las Vegas spread below the ridge, the city he had spent decades learning to operate, whose systems he had navigated with precision and total confidence for 40 years. He stood there for a long time. Then, quietly, without turning around, Mrs. Park is already gone. Mrs. Park had submitted her resignation by email at 7:45 that morning, citing personal reasons. She had walked out of the Kang mansion for the last time with her coat in her handbag and 15 years of memory. She had called her sister the night before. She had bought a bus ticket at 7. She was 3 hours out of Las Vegas before the patriarch's jet touched down. Before leaving, she had done one final thing. Victoria Reeves had sent her a sworn affidavit by email the previous evening. One question, one answer required. Did you personally witness Kang Seojun or his representatives provide financial payments to former household employees in exchange for their silence regarding his son's conduct? Mrs. Park had printed it at the small office printer, the same printer she had used for 15 years of household schedules and staff rosters. She had sat at the kitchen table with a pen. She had thought about the 6 names in the employment file. While she had thought about what she had told herself all those years to make her silence bearable. It wasn't her place. She had her own life to protect. Powerful men always won anyway. She had thought about the note on the kitchen table. My mother would have thanked you too. She had signed the affidavit. Her answer was one word. Yes. Paul Weir's story went live at 6 the following morning. It was not a cautious story. It was not carefully hedged journalism padded with allegedly and sources close to and gentle requests for further comment. It was 6,200 words of documented, sourced, cross-referenced truth, and it read the way real truth reads, not like a scandal, not like entertainment, but like something that has been held back under enormous pressure for a very long time and has finally found the surface. It named Joo-P Kang. It named Kang Seojun. It laid out 6 years of assault and systematic financial suppression with the kind of specificity, dates, locations, dollar amounts, document references that made denial not just difficult, but actively humiliating to attempt. It included, with Diane's full permission, a written transcript of her 2-year-old video testimony. It included photographs of the settlement checks. It referenced the court filing, the police report, and the sworn affidavit of a household employee of 15 years. It was shared 11,000 times in the first hour, 47,000 by noon. By evening, it had broken entirely out of the local news cycle and was running on national platforms, on international feeds, in the particular viral way that stories break through when they are not merely shocking but recognizable. When people reading them feel not just outrage, but the bone-deep recognition of a pattern they have seen before, a power structure they have been asked to accept, a silence they have been expected to keep. The comments filled with women saying, "This happened to me. I know someone this happened to. I signed one of those papers. I was too scared. I wish I hadn't been." Nicky read the story on her phone in Mrs. Rose's kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea she'd forgotten to drink. Morning light came through the window in long bars across the table. Mrs. Rosa sat across from her, quiet and present, not taking up space. When Nicky finished reading, she put the phone down. She thought about her mother, not the hospital, not the flat line, not the cold hand earlier than that. Grace at her sewing machine. Her mother's back bent over bright fabric, her foot steady on the pedal, her hands precise and unhurried in that small hot room full of color and thread. The way Grace would look up when Nicky came home, and her whole face would change, the tiredness dropping away for just a moment, replaced by something so warm and so complete that Nicky had spent 23 years trying to understand what that expression was. It was joy. Just joy. Uncomplicated and total. It counted, Mama, she thought. Every single day of it counted. She opened the group she had created weeks ago. Diane, Clara, Simone, and the 3 other women who had stepped forward in the final days, one at a time, like people walking to the edge of something very high and deciding. She, against everything fear had built in them, to jump. She had named the group simply 6. She wrote, "It's done. You were brave, all of you. I'm proud to know you." The replies came through the morning, from different cities, at different times, like lights turning on in windows across a dark neighborhood one by one. Clara sent a long, slightly rambling paragraph full of the run-on sentences people write when they feel too much to be careful. It ended. "I slept through the night for the first time in almost 2 years. I forgot that was still possible for me. Thank you, Nicky." Simone sent a photograph, herself and her daughter in a park somewhere, both of them laughing. Her daughter was 5 years old and gap-toothed, squinting against the sun, holding a red balloon. Simone's face was the face of someone who had set something down, not forgotten it, not erased it, but set it down. And there's a profound difference. Bud and Simone's face knew the difference. Diane took the longest. Nicky watched the icon showing Diane typing, then not typing, then typing again. She imagined Diane at her kitchen table somewhere, phone in both hands, searching for words too large for words. Finally, Diane wrote, "I made that video 2 years ago. I used to take it out sometimes and watch it and feel sick, like I was carrying evidence from a crime that would never be tried. I kept it because I couldn't delete it, because I genuinely didn't think this day would come." Then, after a pause, "I really didn't." Then after another, "Thank you, Nicky. Thank you for being the person who finally asked." Joo Kang was arrested 4 days later. 2 formal charges filed. The arrest was made at the mansion on an early weekday morning. Not with performance, because Detective Carol Briggs ran an efficient department and had no interest in theater. 2 officers, 1 car, Joo Kang in handcuffs, walking out through the front door of the house that had always protected him, down the steps, past the fountain in the circular drive, into the back of a vehicle that pulled away without drama. A photographer was waiting at the gate. The photograph ran on the front page of 3 newspapers the following morning. In it, Joo looked smaller than he had ever looked inside those walls, without the marble and the chandeliers and the 20-foot ceilings, without the architecture of wealth that had always made him seem larger than he was. He was just a young man in yesterday's clothes being walked to a car. Just a person, which was, in its own way, the most devastating thing the photograph could have shown. The case moved through the courts the way these cases moved, slowly, expensively, with motions that stretched weeks into months. There were moments when the machine of the Kang family's resources seemed to be finding its old familiar pathways. A 6-week delay in 1 hearing. A motion to suppress that Diane's legal team spent 3 consecutive late nights preparing to defeat. Money still found its way through systems, the way money always did. But the story had already been told, and in the world that Nicky had understood better than Kang Seojun ever would, the telling of the story was the point. Like courts would do what courts did, imperfectly, slowly, with all their human limitations. But 47,000 shares cannot be unfiled. 6 women's voices, once raised together, cannot be made to disappear. Simone's NDA was voided in a single hearing session during which Victoria Reeves dismantled it clause by clause with the calm efficiency of someone who had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. Kang Seojun walked into a courtroom 4 months later. His suit was still expensive. His silver hair was still immaculate. His posture still carried 40 years of the particular confidence of a man who had always found a way through. He sat at the defendant's table in his own separate proceeding on charges related to the financial suppression of 6 separate criminal complaints, and he looked across the room at 6 women who had, against every structure he had spent money and influence and decades constructing, refused to disappear. But he looked at them for a long time. None of them looked away first. 3 major business contracts dissolved in the week after the story ran. A 4th followed the week of the arrest. 2 board members resigned with identically worded public statements about organizational integrity, the corporate language for, "We saw which way this was going and we left early." A charitable foundation carrying the Kang name for 12 years voted to remove it. A Las Vegas development that had been called Kang Tower for 8 years announced it was considering renaming. 40 years of carefully managed reputation cracking open in public, in real time. He had spent a lifetime paying to make things disappear. He was discovering now, in the specific and irreversible way, that some lessons can only be learned at the end of everything, that some things, once witnessed, once spoken, once named by 6 separate voices in 6 separate cities, cannot be made to disappear at any price. The silence he had purchased over and over for 15 years had not been silence at all. It had been pressure, the quiet, enormous building pressure of 6 women holding something unbearable because they had been told there was no other choice. And pressure, held long enough, always finds its way out. It had found Nicky. She was sitting in a small cafe on the east side of Las Vegas on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after everything, when her phone buzzed with a message from Victoria Reeves. 2 sentences. First hearing went well. You should come. Nicky set her coffee down, looked out the window at the city laid out in the desert morning light, the same city that had swallowed so many quiet women whole and asked nothing of itself in return. She thought of the note behind the tile in the Kang mansion bathroom, the rushed, frightened handwriting of a woman who had needed to leave something behind, some mark, some proof that she had existed and that what happened to her had been real. We were too scared. Don't be us. Nicky pulled out her phone, opened a new message to Linda, the social worker who had made the first call, who had been tired and overworked and had still, when asked, reached back without hesitation. Thank you, she typed, for believing it was possible. She hit send, put on her jacket, picked up her bag, and walked out into the Las Vegas morning. Bright, wide, completely indifferent in the way cities are. But she was not the same woman who had mopped its most expensive floors and called herself invisible. She had never been invisible. She had been watching. And when the moment came, she had made every second count. If this story moved you, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight. Like this video if Nicky's strength left you speechless, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that silence can be a weapon and patience can be the deadliest plan in the room. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. We'll see you in the next story.